Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Adolescence episode 4. It is the final episode of the show. This is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. Yeah, I was very fascinated to see how this would end, because each episode, while obviously very connected, has felt very, focused, and that makes sense given that each episode is done in a single shot, a single take. It's very hard to make it feel like it's covering a lot of different things with that focus. So one of the things that I have naturally been looking forward to ever since episode 1 was the idea of seeing more follow-up with the family. We never really got to see the mother or the sister's reaction to what the truth was, to what Jamie had done. So I was very excited to sort of maybe expend more time with them. It made a lot of sense to me. As soon as this started and it became clear we're spending this final episode with the family, it is now months and months later. I think it was over a year even. I think it was like 13 months. And they've had time with this. They've had time, obviously, dealing with this new, status quo they're living in, this new life that they're leading based on their reputation. Everyone knows what Jamie did. And that's something the episode definitely goes into. But I think, for me, the bigger thing is how it kind of goes back and plays with some of the ideas that were brought up in some of the other episodes. For example, episode 2 was very much about exploring the society around Jamie, and that in his case, because he's a kid, that's his school more for the most part. It's the type of media he consumes online. It's how the other kids use and interact with that media and with him, and that's what a lot of came out of that episode. And he brought some of that up himself in episode 3 as well. But episode 3 then more so focused on the idea of him talking about his relationship with his family, especially his father, and that came up a lot. And I feel like this episode kind of took those breadcrumbs and actually gave us them bringing those things up in different ways from a different perspective from the viewpoint of the family. For example, later on in this episode, very near the end, there is a moment where the dad, Eddie, starts like saying how they didn't have any clue about what he was looking at on his phone or on his computer, and he complains that he was just looking for something for the gym. He was looking for a gym-related video, and he ended up with a video on his own phone about some guy talking about how men should be men and blah, 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 and kind of this incel stuff that gets spread around online. And you get... what I liked about that being brought up is the idea that, one, of course, they're sort of trying to kind of look for ways that it's not just their fault as parents, that they just didn't on their own screw up. This isn't just all on them. But also just the idea that they genuinely maybe didn't know about this stuff existing, or at least didn't realize how rampant it was and how much their own kid was accessing it. And obviously, since Jamie's been arrested, and a lot of these subjects have probably came up, they've probably spoken about this a lot. Now they're more hyper aware of it. Like, he is like actually noticing it now as a person, and it's because it's affected him. It's affected his son in this big, significant way. But at the same time, it's also giving him something to latch on to try and alleviate his own guilt that maybe he did something wrong as a father. And for me, that's what this episode is really about. It's about this family, especially the parents. Obviously, Lisa's kind of an interesting character, the sister, because she fills this kind of unique space where she's not responsible for her little brother the way that her parents are, but she's still going to be directly affected by being related to him. So she's in this very interesting middle ground compared to the other two. But the mother and the father, like, they're clearly dealing with what their son has done, with the idea that he has definitely done this, which is something that the episode again kind of makes clear in a couple of different ways, honestly, by the end. One is Jamie wanting to change his plea to guilty. The other is just hearing Eddie talk about seeing the video of it happening. And this idea that he's not really spoken about it enough to his wife, and that's something she brings up later on. He thinks that she's being... jealous isn't the right word, but he thinks she's bringing up this idea of feeling regret that Jamie picked him instead of her to be his adult in that scenario. But what she's really saying towards the end of the episode is like, no, I didn't see the video. You saw him actually do it. Like, I've not seen that. I've not actually seen this horrific evidence that proves what he did. And I'm sure she believes it. It doesn't seem like she's trying to doubt it, or she feels like she doesn't believe it because she's not seen it herself. But it does kind of feel like there's some sense of, you got to see it, so you like knew first beyond a shadow of a doubt, and you, like, it just, this separation that he's not opened up about it, because so much of this show is about how his son didn't open up about things and how that's maybe tied to how his father can never open up about things. And that's really the other big thing about this episode, is the examination of him and the mum, and how their influence on the child, on Jamie, has maybe led to this. And I think, just to get it out the way up front, just in case it sounds like I'm in any way saying it is all their fault as I talk about all these little things they get into throughout the episode. The mission statement, I think, by the end of this, which I think is very balanced and very nuanced, is ultimately her saying to Eddie, it's okay for us to feel like we could have done more, whilst accepting that there's lots of things that they had no control in. It's this idea that there is a combination of the society around them that contributes towards this. And I don't know if you heard my phone ding there, but I'll throw it away so that you don't hear it again. But there's this idea that all this society stuff exists. And one of the big things we explored in that second episode is the idea that the police, because they're adults, were so oblivious to all this phone stuff that was happening, all this social media stuff they didn't know about. And these parents, seemingly as well, also had no idea exactly what Jamie was looking at, the type of conversations he was having online, what he was watching on the internet. And this idea that, obviously, yes, maybe they should have been keeping a bit more of an eye on it, and maybe like having more serious talks with them about how to treat these types of ideas and how to respond against the opposite sex and things like that. There's also this idea that there's a generational divide that makes this very difficult and does make it very hard for a lot of parents to kind of keep up with what their kids are actually engaging with. And I think I even have some personal memory of this even happening in the divide between my parents and my generation. Not all the social media stuff, because that kind of happened right after I left school, but more so this idea that I was the first person in my family pretty much who ever touched a computer, who knew how to turn on a computer, never mind do anything with a computer. So when I got a computer at the age of 11, 12, and I got access to the internet, my parents had no idea how to put on an age lock or any kind of parental controls or anything like that. It was just something that never even came up, or they even thought about, or even considered might be something they should do. And obviously, I think I've turned into a fairly functional member of society. Maybe not. That's open for debate. But I think this idea that often, especially when technology is involved, as it is with a lot of what we're talking about here, as in aiding these new... And it's not so much the technology itself is the problem, it's more just the doors that it opens and the new kinds of communication that everyone can have. In ways that the older generation just don't know how to combat because they don't even understand that it's happening. Just like the emoticons in the Instagram post that were explained to the detective, there's so many things that they're just flying under the radar because it's almost like a whole new type of interaction, a whole new type of language that's being used, and it makes it difficult for the older generation to keep an eye on it. And it's the sort of thing where I think the generation growing up now will be a lot more conscious of this stuff. And that's cool. Just like my generation is probably going to be a lot more conscious of making sure kids can't access anything they want on the internet when they're too young. But by the time that happens, what new things are going to be there for the next couple of generations? What new things are the current generation growing up not going to understand about their children's generation, so on and so on. And I think this subject coming up in here, I think is one of the fascinating themes that's kind of been throughout the whole thing. And then obviously the struggle with them as parents to actually try and address is this our fault in some way? And when you mix that with the idea that Jamie's father Eddie has anger issues, and I think throughout this episode it's his birthday and he's trying to act calm and he's trying to act collected, you can see that there's anger there waiting to come out, and it almost feels like there's a double effort to try and contain it because he's worried maybe that any anger he shows is just further an example that it's his fault that his son turned out the way he did. Maybe we hear that he's been going to therapy and that kind of thing. I think one of the little things that really stuck out to me at the start of the episode, and not that he reacts in any bad way to this, but it was a very interesting moment to put at the start of this episode, is after he comes in from the garden and he's talking to Amanda, the wife, about breakfast, and he's sort of hugging her from behind and he's kissing her, And he basically starts putting the moves on and says, hey, let's have some birthday sex, for lack of a better term. And she kind of shoos him away and says, behave yourself. Like, we've got stuff to do. Lisa's going to be up, yada, yada. Which turns out to be true. Lisa's up in like 2 minutes from now. But, he kind of makes a joke and like walks away. But he's effectively rejected by his wife when he tries to make an advance. And it was a very interesting reaction to watch play out. Obviously, it's a very, very specific context. It's very different to a lot of other male and female interactions. But just this idea of him going to his wife, trying to initiate sexual intercourse, and her kind of shooing him away. And it's a fairly healthy reaction, I think, when she does. It's not like he does anything bad here, but it is just interesting to watch him process the idea as little as it is, because it's just his wife saying not now. That's all it is. It's very different to a lot of other rejections that one might face. But I thought that was just thematically very interesting, given that everything we've been talking about with Jamie and his interactions with the opposite sex. And maybe actually seeing his parents interact, not that kids want to see their parents in any sort of flirty or sexual situations, but I think it's interesting that this was a fairly healthy response he had to this. And then later on in the episode, when him and his wife are recounting like a funny story from when they went dancing when they were kids, and they talk about kissing for the first time, and it makes Lisa freak out, and she's like, oh, this is disgusting, stop it, stop it. In some ways, it feels like some of the most healthy conversations that Jamie maybe could have heard once upon a time. That his father looked like an idiot, falling on his ass, that he looked silly, that he was okay to be embarrassed with a silly wig on his head, and whatever the rest of the story was, it felt like he was quite open to all these different things, and it wasn't the end of the world kind of thing. And maybe Jamie could have heard some of this, So I think that stuff is really, really good. And obviously the technical qualities of the one take. There's an extended driving sequence in the middle of this episode that goes to and back to the store. I can't remember what the name of the store was. It was basically B&Q. I don't think it was made up though. I think I've heard of this one. I think it's just a different type of hardware store that does decoration, gardening, all that kind of stuff. I think it's just another one that I'm not as familiar with, but I do think it's a real one. Obviously, there's an interaction here, and I'll go back and talk about the character's journey throughout the episode a bit more, but because there's a lot of little things. Obviously, the big thing early on is the graffiti on the van calling him a nonce, which obviously it's frustrating that someone's graffitied on his van. To be honest, I feel like they could have written a lot worse than nonce. Like, it's insulting, don't get me wrong, but it's like, I think when he was walking out and I caught in my head that it was going to be like someone had graffitied and written something, I genuinely thought it was going to be like something of like, daddy of killer or something. I don't know, that's shit, but something like that, something directly referencing the fact that his son's a murderer or something, like, along those lines. But regardless, this leads to them driving to this store, and there's a lot of like trying to like keep their calm and seeing him struggle to try and wash it off, and it being fruitless. Like, it doesn't work. Like, he tries with soap and water. A couple of teenagers ride past on their bikes and call him a nonce, and he chases after them. He clearly is a little bit paranoid that one of his neighbors might have done this, because he keeps asking them, like, did you see who did this? And a lot of them just keep saying no. And they're polite enough about it, but it does kind of feel like there's an insinuation that Eddie does suspect that maybe people who live around them are kind of like looking down on them or whatever. So all through this, he's trying to keep his cool. He's trying to like act like it's not a big deal, right? Even though it clearly is. It's clearly eating at him, and they're trying to talk to him, both the wife and the daughter. And he's kind of half snapping, but kind of keeping his composure well enough. He won't let the daughter stay back herself. He's worried what might happen if she's here alone. So they all go to the hardware store to get some, either cleaning supplies or advice on how to remove some paint, and that ends up being a big part here. But like, what I really want to get to though is the interaction that he has with the employee of the store, because I think this is one of the most interesting parts of this episode. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion at the end, and it's great to hear kind of the healthy side of the conversation between Eddie and Manda as they kind of come to some terms of accepting that we're not like fully responsible necessarily for creating an absolute monster, but we can admit that we could have done more, right? I really like that side of it. But this scene where he has to ask an employee for advice, and well, he actually asks one different employee, and then that employee leads him to the second employee. That doesn't really matter though. He gets to this employee, which is a scrawny kid, right? He's a scrawny guy who's maybe like 19, something like that. And he realizes who this is. He realizes, oh, you're the dad of that guy, of the kid, Jamie. And throughout this scene, it was extremely uncomfortable in a really kind of layered way. Like, you know, there was a lot of like, just there was a lot of moving parts to how the this scene played out, and how what the drama and the character reactions of this scene are. And what I mean by this is that this character, this employee, basically leans in and says, "Hey, I'm on your side. I'm on Jamie's side. I think it's a lie. I don't think he killed that girl." And he starts basically spouting conspiracy theory nonsense about how, oh, it's not possible. Like, I've seen photos of the body. There's no way the blades, you know, they would have penetrated this way. They would have hit the bone this way. They didn't make it believable. And he just starts saying this stuff and saying that he supports Jamie and doesn't think Jamie's guilty. And what I love about this is that we know Jamie's guilty, but more importantly, his dad knows he's guilty. So he has to stand here and hear this young guy, basically, who, you know, the impression I'm getting here is this is, you know, this conspiracy theory, so probably an incel as well, who wants to support this kid who's been convicted or is on his way to being convicted of this murder. And I think what I love about it is that, one, it's really uncomfortable to have someone say this to you when you've already accepted that your son is guilty of this crime and you already know it. But I think the extra layer on top of that is this idea that this is in part what led to Jamie being what he is the idea that there are people like this, that they're all talking, that they react to things happening where they're basically saying that the whole thing's a lie. They're victim blaming. I don't know if you can victim blame when they're I mean, you can, but like, you know, I'm not sure exactly even what the whole conspiracy is. Like, I'm not sure what are they actually trying to say? Who are they claiming did this? Why is Jamie being framed if he was being framed? Exactly. Like, who's behind the murder? It's, you know, they never get into that, and it doesn't matter because it's not the important part. The important part is that they're like, no, this young white man can't be guilty of anything because he is like one of us and he is clearly innocent, and this is all a conspiracy to go against him. And this is exactly the sort of shit that was getting into Jamie's ear that kind of gave him a certain outlook in the world and fed into his anger, fed into his feelings. So you've got Eddie, who's a very seemingly traditional sort of tough Scouse man, who's having to be dealing with, over the past year or so, the impact he's had on his son and the impact that society's had on his son, and he's clearly been understanding more and more of this type of propaganda that goes around, if you want to call it that. And he's got this kid who thinks he's saying things that the dad wants to hear, but the dad's actually arguably grown, or at the very least he understands exactly the context of what's happened with his son, and has to kind of like hold his tongue because this kid's actually representing part of the problem that led to what happened with his son, rather than being this voice of support, which is what this delusional kid thinks he's doing. Like, him being face to face with this, like, you know, this delusional attitude that this young guy has is fascinating to watch, and it makes Eddie such a complex character beyond just the I'm the tough Scouse man who's turned 50 kind of things. And, you know, when he ends up talking to the wife a little bit later, and he's, you know, they're talking about, you know, possibly moving back to Liverpool and how he thinks that's a terrible idea, like we're not leaving our home. And even when the daughter suggests, or when the daughter says that, you know, things are awful and everyone treats me bad because I'm Jamie's sister, the mum, you know, posits, hey, we could maybe move. And she even shoots that down. Lisa says, no, we can't move because it'll be fine for a little bit. It'll be better for a while. But as soon as someone finds out what happened, it'll just spread and be new again. And it'll just be arguably even worse because we're going to have to go through that start process of everyone figuring it out. So she doesn't want to leave, right? So there's that side of it as well to take in. But like the stuff, the talking to the wife where he's like openly admitting certain things and fears about whether or not he's played a part in this. It's so fascinating to watch. Like, he brings up taking him to sports when he was a kid, and he basically recounts the same story that Jamie told in the last episode, but he has a different framing of it though, where he talks about how all of the other dads were laughing at him and laughing at himself, and he just couldn't look at him. And he was trying to do this to make him tougher. He thought taking him to football would make him tougher, so then he tried taking him to boxing to make him tougher. And it's like he's realizing in some way, as he's saying this all out loud, that all he kept trying to do was make him tougher, and that was probably not the avenue to go down, right? There was obviously other things that maybe he should have done, conversations he should have had, that wasn't just be a tough guy. It feels like, I think that's what I like so much about this character in this show, is that it feels like, yeah, he comes from a specific type of background. He talks about his dad being abusive and hitting him as a kid, and he tried to do better, and he thought he was doing better because he didn't hit the kids. But he's finding out that in other ways that he has failed. And I think that's what makes the ending so poignant. You know, the final scene being him getting into Jamie's room and kissing his little teddy bear and saying, "I'm sorry, son." Like, that's what we end on here, effectively, is him saying, "I'm sorry." Not that it's all his fault in any way. It's not some big dramatic thing. Like, you know, like even in the first episode when the police started saying, "Hey, is the dad abusive?" You know, my brain started going about stuff they might reveal about him being this horrible father or whatever. He's not some monster, right? That's kind of what makes all this feel so grounded and realistic in part, is that these aren't big dramatic characters from, you know, soap operas or movies. These are as grounded as possible characters, and the hard truth is that there are tons of teenagers, tons of young kids who are just like Jamie, right? They describe his activities of like coming home from school and just hiding in his room at his computer, and then being up too late, and the mum would say, "Hey, you've got school tomorrow," and he wouldn't say anything back. He'd just turn off the light and assumingly go to sleep. But this idea that they describe his behavior, and it doesn't sound that weird, right? It actually sounds kind of normal, to be honest. It's just that clearly a lot of people will not necessarily go extreme. A lot of people will grow up and maybe get through it one way or another and come out okay in the other end. But how many of those people that do go extreme could we help, as you know, and I say we in a sort of royal sense, by, you know, trying to interject a little bit more. This idea of like, could they have had more conversations about how he was feeling on a regular basis and not just assume that he was okay? You know, had his dad been more comfortable talking about what was going on? And you also get this idea that maybe the mum never even thought twice about the way he was acting until after, of course, things went bad, right? Until the murder happened. Did she have any reason to suspect that this is strange, other than just he's being a quiet, closed-off teenager? Because a lot of teenagers act that way, and a good amount of them don't turn out to be killers or have anger issues necessarily. And this isn't saying that everyone who acts like that turns out to be that, and I'd like to think so, because I definitely spent a lot of time sitting at a computer when I was a teenager, but more just this sense that it's some of the people who are hiding off like that are probably looking at things they shouldn't be, are being kind of indoctrinated into a certain idea or mantra by online. And even if they don't become like, you know, devout like activists for like, you know, your Andrew Tate side of life, because it doesn't seem like Jamie was that, but he was still certainly influenced by a lot of it. It fed into his anger, it fed into his point of view in a way, even if he wasn't going around saying a lot of these things openly. Maybe he one day might have done that had he not like snapped and killed someone in the meantime. Like, he might have went down this other rabbit hole in a very different way. So it's like, I think there's a lot of complex issues here that it's trying to deal with, and I don't think it's actively trying to blame the parents. And that's actually one of the other things is the one of the people in the store, the first employee that he talks to when he hears that there's graffiti on the van, he's like, "Oh yeah, little rascals, I blame the parents." So even that line kind of cut deep, because like that's obviously something of like, are the parents to blame for bad things that children do? That's something that's obviously ruminating in his head and has been for the past year. So like just that little moment even like had a good bit of impact. So I think the way it broaches all these topics throughout the entire show has been great, and I think the way it's brought some of them together here into a more personal side right? I think it was genius leaving the family till last. You know, if the first episode is more of a general overview of the crime, the second episode is the detective's episode, the third episode is Jamie's episode, this episode is the family's episode. And you can even break it down in other ways as well. You could say that the second episode's about society, the third episode's about the personal psychology, this episode's about, again, the family, but from a, like, how they relate to Jamie rather than what they're going through. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's hard not to feel sympathetic for these characters here. I think it does a really good job of not making it seem like they're just, you know, failures of parents, right? Because that's even one of the points they bring up, is that Lisa seems pretty pretty well adjusted, all things considered. And they're like, wait, how did we create her? And the mum says, the same way we made Jamie. And yeah, like, it's not this exact science, and it's a lot more complex dealing with how someone mentally grows and changes. And, you know, we're not all therapists. We can't all recognize early warning signs of stuff. And that's obviously where, you know, the realization that they're having here, and like some of the guilt that they have, and that Eddie specifically has, is this idea of, could I have recognized some signs? Could I have said some of the right things at the right time to set him on a slightly better path? And could I have done something there? But it's not all their fault. There's a lot of other factors around them. And I think that's kind of, if anything, that's maybe the point of this show, is to think about all these other factors around how other kids are talking to each other, the media they're consuming, social media, that is, not like traditional media per se. Not that can have an impact, but I don't think it's quite the same as you know, the way that they're commenting each other's posts and their own photographs and things like that. I think that's a lot more like personal. It's a lot more cut and deep. Just the way these ideologies spread, obviously, is another big part of it. There's a lot going on there. And, you know, I've glossed over other things here about how he gets a birthday card from Jamie that he's drawn, and they point out later on that the like, he used to be into this. He used to be kind of into art and drawing stuff, and he kind of gave it up when he decided that he wanted to, like, just go on the computer all the time. And that's something that they're confused by. But one of my favorite moments of performances in this episode, and this episode is a constant great performance, is just some of the acting from the parents as they're, well, I mean, again, throughout the whole episode, really. But there's a moment where he's just sort of saying, like, we did everything for him. We bought him what he wanted. We got him a computer. We got him a keyboard and the headset. And we got, you know, it's like, how could we didn't do anything wrong? We did all the right things. We gave him everything he needed. And somehow this still happened. There's this kind of desperation as he's like saying all these things they did right, to try and find something that'll alleviate them or make them feel better about what Jamie's become. And it's just not that simple. And that's kind of part of the point. And, you know, I really have to mention as well, obviously, when they get out of the store, there's a whole thing where Eddie chases after a couple of kids on the bikes, and grabs them by the clothes and just yells at them, and, you know, threatens a bit. Doesn't actually hurt them, of course. But it obviously is quite, you know, it's like he's acting out. He's really losing control. This is the anger coming out. And then he just picks up the paint can and just throws paint all over the van, covering some of the graffiti, but not all of it. And it feels a little unhinged. And I love how awkward and silent them getting back into the van is. And specifically the fact that the camera sneaks into the back of the van. So the entire ride there was from the front, and that was them reminiscing about their early dating life, bonding with the daughter a little bit, talking about music, singing to Aha, which was interesting because normally songs are added in post, right? You would never like film with real music unless all the sound's going to be replaced anyway. But if you want to record their dialogue in any way, you have to not play the music. This is a little bit different though, given that it's all in one take, so they were never going to edit around it anyway. So they probably did just play the music. Now, whether or not the music we're hearing's not been like juiced up with a little bit extra in post, probably hard to tell. But they're singing in time with it. They clearly had to play it for reference in the van. So that's just an interesting little technical thing that was in my head during that bit. But on the ride back though, the camera is behind them. And what's so good about that from a filmmaking perspective is that as Eddie's doing all this stuff, like he's throwing the paint, he's running after the kids, and he's clearly angry, he's getting unhinged, we only get little glimpses of the mother and sister. We really don't see a whole lot of their faces. So when we get into the van and he starts driving back in silence, we can see the side of the mum's face, and we can't see the sister or daughter's face, Lisa, at all. We can't see her. And it's really left open as to what her expression is, and I thought that was perfect, because it was kind of in the same way that withholding like all their reactions to what Jamie had done for a couple of episodes. I felt this about this scene of like, God, what are they possibly thinking? Like everything's breaking down around them, and Eddie's like having like a crisis. Like, he's starting to fall apart at the seams, and how scary that must be for Lisa, especially. I mean, both of them, but like Lisa especially, being the other kid. Like I thought that was great, and then obviously this is the scene that turns into the conversation with Jamie. And one of the beautiful little details of this is that when they accept the call from the prison, Jamie doesn't know that the mum and the sister are there. He thinks he's just talking to his dad. And when they eventually chime in, because the dad goes quiet, when Jamie finally tells him that he's going to change his plea, he just goes silent. The mum jumps in and says, "Hey, we're here too." And Jamie's like, "Oh, I thought it was just me and dad." It once again shows that he still doesn't feel comfortable like talking to his mum and sister. This idea that there's still more comfort in talking to the male in his life, the father figure, than the other two. Regardless of how fractured or how imperfect that relationship is, it shows that he still has a problem opening up to women, even the ones that are related to him and kind of still care about him regardless, even if it's more, complicated than it used to be. He still has a problem with that, and he doesn't really want to talk about it with them. And I thought that was like an interesting detail. And also just this idea that Eddie pulls away, and like he eventually does say some other stuff. At one point I thought he was giving him bad advice, actually, because Jamie said something about how he sometimes still has problems in the yard, meaning presumably like getting into like some fights with the other kids. And Eddie says, "Well, you know what to do then, don't you?" And I thought he was saying like punch them or like, stand up to them and be tough. But actually, the way it goes is Jamie responds by saying, yeah, I know who to talk to. What he's actually telling him is that to go talk to like whoever's in charge, or the counselor or the guards or whoever it is that would step in and like intervene in that kind of thing. So so he was actually giving him decent advice, but for a second there I was worried that he was giving him some bad macho advice in front of the wife and daughter. The way that Jamie also hangs up before Eddie finishes the sentence that he was about to say also kind of hits hard. And they get out the van, and he's obviously a lot more calm, and he's like, "Hey, get out this side, don't get paint on you from the other side." There's a lot of just like little moments in the performances here where like he's saying, "Hey, we'll go to the cinema, we'll go to the pictures." That's what that's how they say it. So they keep saying that. And they keep sort of talking themselves into it that they're going to save the day, that it's going to be a nice day because they've planned it all out. But by the end, and it's like, oh, that's not, go. Like, I mean, Eddie actually says thank you when the wife finally says, "No, we don't have to go." He's thankful for it. And then it's actually the daughter who suggests maybe we could just rent something and have like take in at home. And he's like, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll still get the Chinese food, but we'll do it at home. But it's kind of sad because it also shows that they're not ready to kind of interact with the rest of the world. Like this thing that's happened, this violent crime that their son has done, has got such a reverberation that it's going to be affecting their lives for quite some time, until people have forgotten about it a little bit, moved on a little bit. I'm sure Lisa, she'll grow up, maybe she'll move away. She'll eventually get somewhat away from it, but she's always going to have a brother who did what he did. They're always going to have a son who did what he did. It's so interesting to see them having to try and deal with this, and without ever really saying how much him changing his play means. Like, because the wife like tries to say to him, it's probably for the best, and I think if you were honest, you'd see that too. And so much of like seemingly his influence in Jamie is him not seeing things and just doing what like his instincts are. So I found the ending to be quite poignant, and felt like it was making it clear that there's not some easy big bad to blame for all this. I mean, some of the social media stuff and like the incel kind of influence is absolutely just a bad thing. There's no like shades of grey to that. But everything else is very much like it's other kids kind of struggling. It's the parents struggling to understand what's going on with their kid. there's a lot of layers that's not just a simple evil thing you can blame. And even though like, Eddie's tempted to maybe blame himself and he feels guilty, ultimately it's not that simple either. There's, even though it's clear why they would both feel that way, that they'd feel that they'd failed in some way. And yeah, I think that's what the ending's kind of about, is like accepting that, yeah, we do share some responsibility from this, but it can't all be on us. We could have done more, but it's not that we were absolutely dreadful at it. So no, and it's the sad part of like ending on that shot of like Jamie's bed, of like, it's a childhood bed, it's a single bed with a stuffed animal or whatever on top. Like, his childhood is over. He will never be a child again. And there was some reminiscing from the two of them as well in the emotional scene where they were talking about him being a kid. Although I will say this, and I get it, I totally get it. It's not like a complaint or a problem. I did have to turn on subtitles for a little bit, because when they were getting emotional and blubbering in their thick Scouse accents, it was actually a little bit tough to make out some of the words they were saying. Just very thick accents. I like that they pointed out that they're from Liverpool, because the kids don't have the Scouse accent, so clearly they've been living here wherever they are long enough that the kids don't have the thick Scouse accents, but both the mum and dad do. And it was fine for most of the episode. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It just, when they started blubbering, kind of like half getting their words out because they were getting emotional, that was a little tougher to take those lines in. But that's not really a complaint. That's just natural, really, if anything. It felt real, and I think that's kind of what this show inherently has been going for, are these slices of life in different parts of the journey. And it shows a lot of restraint to me that this is what they wanted to end on, because it would have been so easy to do an episode where the verdict or the trial happens. It'd be so easy to do the obvious things, or do the first day in like his permanent prison, wherever that is, whatever youth correctional facility he's going to be in for years, like show his like first day there, or maybe like a day after some time has passed, show him interacting with others there. Like, not that that's not interesting, but they clearly had kind of an idea and a mission statement of what they wanted to really get to, and throughout their four episodes, it felt like every episode had a very distinct purpose. Episode 1 almost inherently is kind of not a red herring, but like it's almost like more traditional in the sense that as grounded as it is, it does sort of draw you in with the enticing of the mystery of the murder, of what happened, and that's more typical TV stuff. But then when you get to episodes 2, 3, and 4, and each one's kind of this thorough examination of why, and then the ultimate kind of acceptance at the end that that child is gone, like he has become something else now. And arguably he was already gone for a while, and the parents just never noticed it. And that's also kind of poignant in its own way. Anyway, geez, I don't even know what else I could possibly say. I'm sure there's some little moments that I've not mentioned that were really good. There was definitely a good handful of times throughout this episode where I found myself like kind of in awe of Stephen Graham's performance. I found like some of his like emotional beats, or where he was trying to fight some anger, or the emotions were kind of mixing up together a little bit. I found those very powerful and very real. And I always enjoy well-written stories about someone who is like reevaluating themselves and re-examining like how good or bad they have been, and if they need to redeem for something, if they feel like they've done something bad or not atone for something. I always like stories where characters kind of go through that. And there was definitely shades of that throughout this episode, where he's kind of weighing up who he is. And part of his anger that he has in this episode is because he does feel somewhat responsible. It's hitting deep when anyone kind of like references who his son is or blames him. And when he talks to that employee who like is on Jamie's side, quote unquote, like I think part of him is like, this is exactly the sort of person that I should have been warning my son about, rather than the lack of conversation that was happening. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Adolescence. It's a great show. It's no doubt going to be one of the best, if not maybe the best show of the year. I'd have to think about what else has come out and what else is coming out before I make that assertion, but super high quality. Obviously, because I'm a little bit behind in doing these, I think Netflix put out that it's like one of their most watched shows ever. It's like in the top 5, only beat by like some Stranger Things and Squid Game. Which, you know, as much as I think Netflix do mostly make a bunch of slop, obviously once in a while something sneaks through like this that's genuinely quite special. But I do think it's interesting that out of their most successful shows, one is a British show and one is a Korean show. Korean's even more impressive because it's not even in English, which obviously, you know, English speaking audiences can be a bit fickle when it comes to that kind of thing. But it's really nice that to see that other shows from other parts of the world can be successful in North America or anywhere else, indeed, for that matter. So cool. That's my thoughts on Adolescence. It's a fantastic little show. I would highly recommend it. Not that you need a recommendation if you listen to me talk about all 4 episodes in detail, because you should have watched it already. But that is me. Thank you for joining. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. Check out MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. There's 2 or 3 of those going out every week. Thank you very much. I will see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?